Hello and welcome to In Retrospect, a series where I play the games of my past and try to determine if they're as good as I remember. Today we're looking at Assassin's Creed 2, so let's get into it. Hot off the heels from the first Assassin's Creed game, AC2's development team decided to go a lot bigger on the story, beyond running around an historical setting stabbing people in the bum. The game starts immediately after the end of the first one, and has an awkwardly animated Desmond and Lucy escape Abstergo. During this downtime before the game begins proper, you're given a huge amount of exposition, and are introduced to your abrasive team in the field. Rebecca is your standard tech geek from every movie and game ever, who uses made-up techno jargon to make her seem smarter than the writers could actually make her. Sean is your typical British cynic. I think he's supposed to seem focused and intriguing, but he just comes off as a bit of an asshole. Once you dive into the Animus again, the game does start to pick up. Ezio is a very likeable character, as are his family members. There is a little too much foreshadowing in the dialogue for my liking, and unless you've never heard a revenge story in your life, you're gonna know where the game's going. Whilst helping out Ezio's family, you start unlocking events to do at your leisure, and this is where I was going to make a complaint about how games are padded with extra content to make it seem bigger, but AC2 avoids this. There's something like 15 side missions over the whole game, which is very reasonable. You don't get anything for doing them, but it's nice to see a feature like this not be bloated beyond recognition. Although I have to say, there are way too many assassination contracts. I know this is an assassin-based game, but they're just too similar to be fun. I think there's something like 24 in total. Moving on, something I did really like about the first sequence was the handling of the execution. It's a fairly big deal in the town, and the guy running the show has completely betrayed your family. But what I like is how they managed to add to the shock factor without shoving it in your face. You notice on the scaffold that Ezio's father and older brother are waiting to be hanged, but Ezio's younger brother is also there. It's not pointed out, there's no fuss made over it, you just see him there panicking. Then boom, the trapdoors are open and the three of them are dead. Sure, it's sad that Giovanni and Federico were killed, but Petruchio couldn't have been more than 10.
Run, boy. Fast.
The next couple of hours are essentially dedicated to getting you ready for the rest of the game. You get introduced to shops, weapons, fighting, blending, hiring groups, and villa management. That last one is quite interesting, as it gives you a passive way to make money, and the more you buy, the more money you make. It's quite interesting to see your hub slowly improve as well. I also really loved the improvement of blending in this game. In the first game, you could only do it with certain groups, and you had to press a button to actually initiate it. Whereas in this game, you can blend with any group of 2 or more people simply by walking up to them. The final two things you're shown are the Codex pages and the Assassin Seals. These are your true marker for in-game progress, as the Codex pages give you upgrades to health, weapons and abilities, while the seals give you the armour of Altair, the end-game armour. During this section, you complete your second story assassination, killing Vieri de Pazzi. Ezio has a bit of a breakdown after the fact, screaming insults at the corpse, until
It's a me, Mario!
Steps in to teach him a valuable lesson about respect. This is a huge turning point for Ezio in becoming a true member of the Brotherhood.
sofferto di più! Hai avuto la fine che meritavi! Spero che
Enough, Ezio! Show some respect.
Respect? After all that's happened, do you think he would have shown either of us such kindness?
You are not Fieri. Do not become him.
I briefly mentioned the seals earlier, and I want to just go back to that subject for a moment. When you go to collect a seal, you have to make your way through some free runnable environment to get to the tomb holding the seal. All well and good, but for some reason in most of these places the camera is fixed, or at least semi-fixed. This becomes a problem when directional jumping is the difference between life and death most of the time, and the game seems to work by making your jump direction relevant to you and not Ezio. I guess what I'm trying to say is that only having 8 possible directions on a keyboard makes it very difficult to pick the right one on your first attempt. This could be solved with a controller, if not for the fact that the control scheme makes absolutely no sense, and the controls are not fully customizable. The rest of the gameplay, however, is very solid. There's nothing that jumps out as an active detriment, and most of the controls are very intuitive. My only other complaint would be the presence of a weapon wheel. This is what marks any game as an obvious console port, because weapon wheels just aren't usable on a PC. It's functional, sure, but it would just be much easier to have all of my weapons and items mapped to one key press, or even the scroll wheel, rather than hold a button, select an item with the mouse, have the wrong item selected because the wheel is designed to work with the thumbstick, reopen the wheel, select it again, and, well, you get the picture. The story up to this point is enjoyable, but nothing of particular note happens. I spent a few hours cleaning up some side missions and upgrading the villa a little more, but most of what I was doing was busy work. There was also an opportunity to explore the Aldatore family crypt, which provides a little more backstory, but other than that it's just another tomb with terrible camera angles and awful directional controls. By the time you get to Venice, you're well and truly in the pattern of arrive at a place, get viewpoints, do side missions, do main mission, go back to villa. While this is incredibly repetitive and honestly quite boring while you're doing it, it does feel good once you've completed an area and moved on from it. I might have spent the last few paragraphs giving AC2 the third degree, but I was really enjoying myself. I think a major contributor to my enjoyment was the atmosphere that Ubisoft created. The visuals are great, but the real kicker is in the sound design. Ambient noise is extremely immersive, and conversations going on between NPCs feel real. The greatest asset of the sound department, though, is the music. I love the music in this game, especially the track for Firenze. It's absolutely beautiful, and makes the hours you spend grinding out those assassination contracts just fly by. Speaking of assassination contracts, there's something that really bugs me about them. Tailing guards or targets is a cool idea, and it does add to the mystique of the assassins being able to follow their targets and not run in gung-ho. But there's just too much of it, and it takes far too long. One of the final contracts in Firenze had me tailing a guy for a solid 7 minutes. That's 7 minutes of just walking and stopping. Assassin's Creed 2 is one of those games where you run slower and walk faster than everyone else in the world, meaning missions that make you follow someone become a waking nightmare. The developers had a good concept, but they blew the execution by trying to pump too much of it into the final product. As the game progresses, Ezio makes his way through his list and kills off more Templars without really knowing why. He knows the Templars killed his family, he knows they're his enemy, but he still doesn't know why. I think this is an interesting plot device. We are going through the motions because this is a video game, but he's doing it because everyone else is telling him to. There are a few more Desmond sections scattered throughout the game, and honestly I was so indifferent towards them. Yeah, it's cool that you get to do assassin stuff in the real world, but it just ends up being a massive tease for the next couple of games. Kristen Bell does a pretty good job of portraying Lucy, but Nolan North is so cookie cutter at this point that all of his roles feel exactly the same. And while we're on characters, the animations in this game for the most part are horrible. Ezio and a couple of the main cast have good animation, even going so far as to have facial expressions and body language that people can understand. But nearly every other character has the most janky movement ever conceived. Around 2/3 of the way through the story, Ezio has a revelation that the codex pages he's been collecting come together to form a prophecy surrounding the pieces of Eden. It's been 10 years since the beginning of the game at this point, and Ezio reflects on how he was young and stupid, and if he had only listened from the start, he could have avoided much of this. There are subtle hints building to this conclusion. At a few points in the game, Mario tells Ezio to collect more pages, but Ezio doesn't see it as a priority, brushing his uncle off almost every time. It's only much, much later that he realizes his mistake.
My God! When my uncle told me about the Codex, I was too young, too brash to imagine it was anything but an old man's fantasy. But now I see. The killing of Mocenigo, even the Medici, my father and brothers. It was all part of his plan. To find the vault. The Spaniard.
Rodrigo Borgia.
The boat from Cyprus arrives tomorrow. I plan to be there to meet it.
Good luck, my friend.
This character development is excellent, and it's something I think the Assassin's Creed games have done quite well. Altair, in the previous game, had his entire arc dedicated to maturing as a member of the Order, and as a person, and while Ezio is making the same journey, he does it in a very different way. The added interaction between Ezio and his allies adds to his growth and bulks up the story in a way that holds substance over style. It might be quite cliché, but it works because the writers succeeded in making Ezio believable and relatable. A couple of hours before the end of the game, Ezio finds out that everyone that has helped him throughout his journey is also an assassin. He's then formally initiated into the Brotherhood and sets off to finish Rodrigo Borgia and keep the apple from falling into his hands. This goes quite spectacularly wrong when Forli is besieged and Ezio ends up losing the apple to some monk and getting stabbed in the process. He wakes up a while later with a new beard and a lust to finish the job. Returning to Firenze, the city has gone to rot, as the monk has used the piece of Eden to enslave the populace's leaders. plummeting the city into oppression and tyranny. Again, you have to do more tailing and following and escorting, and at this point all I could do was sigh. The game was very near its conclusion, and I was still being forced to do these terrible missions. It's like Ubisoft had a meeting, and someone said, "Okay, I need you to pitch all of the worst ideas possible so we can pad the runtime as much as we can." I'm enjoying the game, Ubisoft. Stop trying to take that away from me. Right before the end of the game, there is a truly awful set of missions. I understand their importance to the story, but they were so poorly executed it may as well have been an entirely different game. You're tasked with killing 9 lieutenants across Firenze in order to incite rioting across the city and draw out the monk who stole the piece of Eden. This whole section is good, but again lasts too long. It took me around 2.5 hours to complete the 9 assassinations and the subsequent story section afterwards. Ezio's speech was nice though.
Silenzio! 22 years ago, I stood where I stand now and watched my loved ones die, betrayed by those I had called friends. Vengeance clouded my mind, would have consumed me, were it not for the wisdom of a few strangers. Taught me to look past my instincts. They never preached answers, but guided me to learn from myself. We don't need anyone to tell us what to do. Not Savonarola, not the Medici. We are free to follow our own path. There are those who will take that freedom from us. Too many of you gladly give it. But it is our ability to choose whatever you think is true that makes us human. There is no book or teacher to give you the answers, to show you the path. Choose your own way. Do not follow me or anyone else.
I don't think so.
So the game comes to a head with a fist fight against the Pope and a huge exposition dump. But for some reason it doesn't feel out of place here. This is absolutely the bad guy spilling the plan before he dies trope. But then the bad guy doesn't die, and the plan happens anyway. It's a huge subversion of expectations, and it really works. Ezio meets up with a precursor and is told that he was merely meant to carry a message to Desmond. Throughout the conversation, Minerva looks directly into the camera a few times. At first glance, this may seem like poor directing, but then when she states that the message is for Desmond, it makes sense to us. But not poor Ezio, who is left mind blown and head full of questions. Let's conclude. Assassin's Creed 2 is the best in the series. There is no doubt in my mind about that fact. I came into this thinking it was going to be way more drawn out and padded than it actually was, which pleasantly surprised me. The story is good. It's not great, but it is good. I personally don't like the overarching narratives of the Assassin's Creed games, but I do love the settings, the gameplay, and most importantly the characters. Ezio is most people's favourite character from the franchise, and it's easy to see why. He was written to be suave, enticing, and alluring, and the writers managed to pull this off without making him intolerable. He's the kind of person you could have a beer with. There are still some real gripes I have with this game though, mainly the movement. It's just not refined enough. There are so many instances where you need to be precise in your movements, but this just isn't possible with the tools you're given. There were so many times where I would rebound off a wall in the wrong direction, jump to my death when I meant to just drop a level on a rooftop, or the leap of faith animation would fail and I would plummet 200 feet to my death. The targeting system is pretty janky too, with far too many civilians getting a knife in the throat when I meant to hit the guy next to them. Thankfully this doesn't happen often enough to warrant giving up, and so for all its quirks, I'd give Assassin's Creed 2 a solid 7.5 out of 10. I don't really know much about the newer games, as the last one I played was Black Flag, but I think the developers need to remember what made the series what it is, and go back to that. So let's have a little less of this, and a little more of this.